Maria Santos checked her watch for the third time as she walked through the school parking lot. She was already 20 minutes late for her daughter's school fundraising event. Her old car had trouble starting again, and she had to wait for a neighbor to help jump the battery. Maria pulled her thin cardigan tighter around her shoulders as the evening air felt cold against her skin. The Lincoln Elementary School gymnasium was buzzing with activity when Maria finally walked through the doors. Colorful balloons hung from the ceiling, and round tables covered with white tablecloths filled the space. Parents dressed in their best clothes chatted and laughed while children ran between the tables. Maria looked down at her simple black pants and worn cardigan. She felt out of place among all these well-dressed people. Maria spotted her daughter Emma sitting at a table near the back with her friend's family. Emma waved excitedly when she saw her mother. Maria smiled and waved back, making her way through the crowded room. She said hello to the other parents at the table and took the empty seat they had saved for her. "You made it, Mom," Emma said, hugging her mother's arm. "I was worried you wouldn't come." "I promised I would be here," Maria said, kissing the top of Emma's head. "I just had some car trouble." The evening was going well. Maria watched as the school principal stood on the small stage at the front of the gym. She talked about how much money they needed to raise for new playground equipment. Then the auction began. Parents bid on donated items like restaurant gift cards, spa treatments, and vacation packages. Maria sat quietly, knowing she could not afford to bid on anything. As the auction continued, Maria noticed a beautiful old piano sitting in the corner of the stage. It was a black grand piano that must have been donated for the event. The principal announced that the final item was special. A local musician was supposed to play a concert for everyone, but something had gone wrong. "Unfortunately, our pianist for tonight had a family emergency and cannot be here," the principal said into the microphone. "We were hoping to end the evening with some beautiful music, but we need someone who can play piano." The principal looked around the room hopefully. "Does anyone here play piano? We would be so grateful if someone could help us out." The room became quiet. People looked around at each other, but no one raised their hand. Maria felt her heart start to beat faster. She looked down at her hands folded in her lap. These hands had once flown across piano keys with skill and grace. But that was so long ago. That was a different life. "Come on, folks," the principal said with a nervous laugh. "Surely someone here can play a simple song. It doesn't have to be perfect." Mrs. Henderson, who was sitting next to Maria, suddenly remembered something. She had been to Maria's small apartment once to pick up Emma for a playdate. She had seen an old piano pushed against the wall in the tiny living room. "Maria plays piano," Mrs. Henderson said loudly enough for others to hear. "I've seen a piano in her apartment." Maria felt her face turn red. Several people at the table turned to look at her. She shook her head quickly. "Oh no, I don't really play anymore. That piano is very old. It doesn't even work properly." But Mrs. Henderson was already calling out to the principal. "We have a pianist here. Maria Santos can play." The principal's face lit up with relief. She looked directly at Maria and smiled. "Would you be willing to help us out, Maria? We would be so thankful." All eyes in the gymnasium turned toward Maria. She felt like she wanted to disappear under the table. Her hands started to shake. She had not played piano in front of people for more than 20 years. The last time was at her high school graduation, when she was just 18 years old. "I really can't," Maria said quietly. "I haven't played in a very long time. I would probably embarrass myself." "Please, Mom," Emma whispered. "It would be so cool if you played piano for everyone." Maria looked at her daughter's hopeful face. Emma had never heard her mother play piano. Maria had always made excuses when Emma asked about the old piano in their apartment. She said it was broken or too old to make good sounds. The truth was that playing piano brought back many painful memories. The principal stepped down from the stage and walked over to Maria's table. "Please, Maria, we really need your help. It doesn't matter if you're not perfect. Everyone will just be happy to hear some music." Other parents at nearby tables started encouraging Maria too. Go ahead, Maria. I'm sure you'll do great. We'd love to hear you play. Maria felt trapped. She could not say no with everyone looking at her and waiting. She slowly stood up from her chair. Her legs felt weak, and her hands were trembling. She had cleaned houses and worked as a cashier for 20 years. She was just a simple woman trying to raise her daughter alone. She was not a performer anymore. I'll try, she said in a voice so quiet that people had to lean forward to hear her, but please don't expect too much. I'm very out of practice. The crowd clapped politely as Maria walked toward the stage. Each step felt heavy. She climbed the 3 steps to the stage and stood in front of the piano. The black surface reflected the gym lights, and she could see her nervous face looking back at her. Maria sat down on the piano bench and adjusted it slightly. She placed her hands on the keys but did not press down yet. The keys felt cool and smooth under her fingertips. Suddenly, she was 18 years old again, sitting in a practice room at the community college. She remembered the dreams she once had. She remembered the scholarship letter that came in the mail. She remembered the choice she had to make. The gymnasium became completely quiet. Even the children stopped running around and talking. Everyone was waiting to see what this simple woman in her cardigan would play. Maria closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, something had changed. In her expression, her nervous energy was still there, but now there was something else too. Something that had been sleeping for 20 years was beginning to wake up. Maria sat at the piano bench, her hands hovering above the keys. The silence in the gymnasium felt heavy and uncomfortable. She could hear whispers starting from different tables around the room. People were not trying very hard to keep their voices down. Who is she anyway? Someone asked from a table near the front. I think she works at the grocery store on Main Street, another voice answered. I've seen her at the checkout. Great, so we're going to listen to the cashier play Chopsticks. A man said with a laugh that was not very kind. Maria heard these comments and they made her feel even more nervous. She looked out at the crowd and saw faces that showed they were not expecting much. Some people were already checking their phones. Others were gathering their purses and coats, getting ready to leave as soon as this was over. Mrs. Peterson, who lived in the big house on Elm Street, leaned over to her husband. This is what happens when you let just anyone participate in school events. We should have hired a real musician. How long do you think this will take? Her husband whispered. Back. I have an early meeting tomorrow. The principal tried to help by speaking into the microphone again. Everyone, please give Maria your attention. She's kindly volunteering to play for us tonight. But even the principal's voice sounded like she was not expecting much. She introduced Maria as one of our parent volunteers and nothing more. There was no mention of any musical training or experience. Maria was just a helper, someone filling in because the real pianist could not come from her seat. Maria could see Emma at her table. Her daughter was smiling and giving her a thumbs up, but Maria also noticed that Emma looked a little worried. Emma had never heard her mother play piano, and she was probably wondering if her mom actually knew how to play. Dr. Williams, who was the town's most successful lawyer, was sitting at the front table with his wife. I hope this doesn't take too long, he said, looking at his expensive watch. Some of us have important things to do. His wife nodded in agreement. I don't know why they couldn't just cancel the music part. We've already bid on everything we wanted. A group of teenagers who had come with their parents were not even trying to hide their boredom. They were texting on their phones and rolling their eyes. One of them said loudly enough for others to hear, "This is going to be so bad. Can we leave now?" Maria felt her confidence dropping even lower. Her cardigan suddenly felt too warm and she could feel sweat on her forehead. She had always been a shy person, and being the center of attention like this was her worst nightmare. All these successful, well-dressed people were judging her before she even played a single note. The school janitor, Mr. Lopez, was cleaning up some spilled drinks near the back of the gym. He felt sorry for Maria. He had worked at the school for 15 years and had seen many events like this. He knew how cruel people could be when they thought someone was not good enough for them. "Poor lady," he said quietly to Mrs. Garcia, who helped in the school cafeteria. "Look how nervous she is," Mrs. Garcia nodded. "These fancy parents think they're better than everyone else. That woman probably works 2 jobs just to pay for her daughter's school supplies." Meanwhile, at the front tables where the wealthiest families sat, the comments continued. "I heard she lives in those small apartments behind the shopping center," one woman said. "You know, the ones for people who can't afford real houses." "Well, what did we expect?" Another replied. "The school should have made sure they had a backup plan with a real musician." Some parents were already starting to leave. They stood up from their tables and began walking toward the exits. They moved slowly and quietly, but Maria could see them from the stage. Each person who left made her feel worse about herself. The room was getting restless. Children were starting to talk and move around again because their parents had stopped paying attention. The noise level was rising as more people gave up on the idea of hearing good music. Maria tried to block out the negative energy around her. She focused on the piano keys in front of her. These keys had once been her best friends. They had never judged her or made her feel small. They had only given back the music she put into them, but 20 years was a long time. What if she really had forgotten how to play? What if these people were right to have low expectations? What if she was about to embarrass herself and her daughter in front of the whole school community? A woman at a middle table was talking to her friend about vacation plans. They were not even pretending to wait for the music anymore. "So we're thinking about going to Europe this summer," she said. "The kids would love to see Paris." Her friend responded excitedly, and they began planning their trip right there during what was supposed to be a musical performance. Other conversations started up around the room as people decided that whatever Maria was going to play was not worth their attention. The principal looked worried. She could see that she was losing her audience. Some people had already left, and others were clearly ready to go. She had hoped that ending the evening with music would be a nice touch, but now she wished she had just ended with the auction. Maria felt completely alone on the stage. Even though there were still about 100 people in the room, she felt like she was sitting by herself. The piano bench felt too high, and her feet barely touched the floor. Her hands looked small and rough from years of cleaning and working with them. These were not the hands of a pianist, but then she looked over at Emma again. Her daughter was still smiling at her, still believing in her. Emma did not care what these other people thought. She was proud that her mom was brave enough to try. Maria took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. She could still hear conversations around the room, but she tried to focus only on the piano. The keys felt familiar under her fingertips, like greeting an old friend after many years apart. She was about to prove everyone wrong, but she did not know it yet. Neither did anyone else in that room. They were all about to learn something important about judging people too quickly. Maria closed her eyes and took one more deep breath. She tried to forget about all the people watching her and all the whispered comments she had heard. In her mind, she went back to a time when music was everything to her. She remembered sitting at an old piano in her childhood home, practicing for hours until her mother called her for dinner. Her fingers found their first position on the keys. She decided to start with something gentle and beautiful. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major had always been one of her favorite pieces. It was the first advanced piece she had ever learned completely. She remembered being 16 years old and finally mastering all the difficult parts. The first notes came out soft and hesitant. Maria was testing the piano, getting used to how the keys felt and how the sound filled the large gymnasium. The piano was actually in good condition, much better than she had expected. Someone had tuned it recently, and the tone was warm and clear as she played the opening melody. Something magical began to happen. The nervous energy that had been making her hands shake started to change into something else. Her fingers remembered exactly where to go. The muscle memory that had been sleeping for 20 years was waking up. Maria's posture began to change as she played. Her shoulders, which had been hunched up with nervousness, slowly relaxed and dropped into their natural position. Her back straightened, and she leaned slightly forward toward the piano, the way she had been taught so many years ago. Her whole body was remembering how to be a pianist. The hesitant, careful notes became more confident. Maria's fingers moved with growing certainty across the keys. She was not thinking about the technique anymore. Her hands knew what to do. They remembered the weight needed for each note, the timing of each phrase, and the feeling of creating. Beautiful music. Her face, which had been tight with worry and embarrassment, began to soften. The lines of stress around her eyes disappeared. A peaceful expression took over her features as she lost herself in the music. This was the face of someone who was finally doing what she was meant to do. The conversations in the gymnasium began to fade. At first, people did not notice the change. They were still talking about their own things, still getting ready to leave, still not paying attention. But gradually the beautiful melody started to reach their ears. Mrs. Henderson, who had first mentioned that Maria played piano, was the first to really listen. She stopped talking in the middle of a sentence about her weekend plans. Something about the music made her turn toward the stage and really pay attention to what she was hearing. "Listen," she whispered to her husband, putting her hand on his arm. "Really listen to this." Her husband looked annoyed at being interrupted, but when he actually listened to the music, his expression changed. This was not simple playing. This was not someone just hitting the right keys. This was real piano playing, the kind you might hear in a concert hall. The children in the room were among the first to notice the change. Children often hear music differently than adults. They feel it more than they think about it. The kids, who had been running around and playing, began to slow down. Some of them stopped completely and turned toward the stage. Emma felt her heart start to beat faster as she listened to her mother play. She had never heard anything like this before. She knew her mom was special, but she had never known that. Her mom could create something so beautiful. Tears started to form in Emma's eyes, though she did not understand why. The teenagers who had been complaining and texting on their phones slowly looked up. One of them actually put her phone down completely and listened. The music was reaching parts of them that they usually kept hidden behind their cool attitudes. As Maria moved into the more complex parts of the nocturne, her playing became even more confident and expressive. Her left hand created a steady, gentle rhythm while her right hand sang the melody with perfect expression. She used dynamics that showed years of training, playing some notes very softly and others with more strength, creating a musical conversation that told a story without words. The sound of the piano filled every corner of the gymnasium. The acoustics were actually quite good, and Maria's playing took advantage of every bit of space. The music seemed to wrap around everyone in the room, drawing them in whether they wanted to be drawn in or not. Dr. Williams, who had been so impatient to leave, found himself leaning forward in his chair. He had season tickets to the symphony, and thought he knew good music when he heard it. What he was hearing now was definitely good music. Very good music. His wife noticed the change in her husband's attention. She stopped planning their exit and started listening too. The melody was so beautiful that it made her think of things she had not thought about in years. She remembered being young and dreaming of learning to play piano herself. More conversations around the room began to stop. People were becoming aware that something special was happening on the stage. The woman who had been talking about her vacation to Europe stopped in the middle of describing the hotels she wanted to visit. Her friend, who had been listening politely, was now completely focused on the music. Maria was not aware of any of these changes in her audience. She was completely absorbed in the music she was creating. Her eyes were still closed, and she was in a world where only she and the piano existed. This was the world she had lived in as a young person, the world she had missed terribly for 20 years. Her fingers moved across the keys with increasing grace and confidence. The difficult passages that would challenge even advanced students seemed easy for her. She played with the kind of musical understanding that comes only from years of serious study and natural talent. The janitor, Mr. Lopez, had stopped cleaning completely. He stood near the back wall with his mop in his hand, listening to the most beautiful piano music he had ever heard live. Mrs. Garcia had come out of the kitchen and was standing beside him, both of them amazed by what they were witnessing. As Maria approached the end of the first piece, the entire atmosphere of the room had changed. The dismissive, impatient crowd was becoming an audience of people who were genuinely moved by what they were hearing. Some people had stopped leaving and were actually coming back to their seats. The transformation was not just in the audience, it was in Maria herself. With each note she played, she was becoming more of who she really was. The shy, nervous cashier was fading away, and the talented musician she had always been was emerging when the last gentle notes of the Chopin nocturne faded into silence. Something had fundamentally changed in that gymnasium. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. The silence that followed the end of Chopin's nocturne was complete and profound. For several seconds, nobody in the gymnasium moved or spoke. It was the kind of silence that happens when people realize they have just experienced something extraordinary and need a moment to understand what they have heard. Maria opened her eyes slowly. She blinked a few times, as if she was waking up from a beautiful dream. For those few minutes while she played, she had forgotten where she was. She had forgotten about the dismissive comments and the people who had been ready to leave. She had been lost in the music, the way she used to be lost when she was young and the world was full of possibilities. Now reality came back to her. She was sitting on a stage in front of a room full of people who had not expected much from her. She started to feel nervous again, wondering what they thought of her playing. She looked out at the audience and was surprised by what she saw. Every single person in the gymnasium was looking directly at her. The people who had been getting ready to leave were now sitting on the edges of their seats. The teenagers who had been bored and texting were staring at the stage with their mouths slightly open. Even the children had stopped playing and were watching her with wide, amazed eyes. Dr. Williams was leaning forward in his chair so far that he looked like he might fall off. His wife had her hand over her heart, as if the music had touched something deep inside her chest. The expression on her face showed that she was trying to understand how the simple woman in the cardigan could create such beautiful sounds. Mrs. Peterson, who had made the mean comment about letting just anyone participate, looked embarrassed. Her face was red and she kept glancing around to see if anyone remembered what she had said. Her husband was shaking his head slowly, as if he could not believe what he had just heard. The principal stood at the side of the stage with tears in her eyes. She had introduced many musical performances at school events over the years, but she had never heard anything like this in her school gymnasium. She realized that she had introduced Maria as just one of our parent volunteers when she should have introduced her as a serious musician. Emma was crying openly now. She was not sad. She was overwhelmed with pride and love for her mother. She had always known her mom was special, but now she understood that her mom had a gift that was rare and beautiful. She felt sorry that her mother had kept this talent hidden for so long. The other parents at Emma's table were looking back and forth between Emma and her mother on the stage. They were putting together the pieces and realizing that this family they had probably not paid much attention to before was extraordinary. Mrs. Henderson felt proud that she had been the one to suggest Maria play, but she also felt guilty for not knowing about Maria's incredible talent before tonight. Around the room, people were having quiet conversations in whispers, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell that Maria's music had created. Did you know she could play like that? One mother asked another. I had no idea. I see her at the grocery store all the time. She always seemed so quiet and shy. That was professional level playing. Where did she learn to play like that? The teenagers were having their own shocked conversations. Dude, that was actually amazing, one boy said to his friend. I thought this was going to be so boring. She's better than my piano teacher, a girl added. Like way better. Mr. Lopez and Mrs. Garcia were still standing at the back of the room, both of them amazed by what they had witnessed. I've been working here for 15 years, Mr. Lopez said quietly. I've never seen anything like that. She plays like the musicians on the classical music station, Mrs. Garcia replied. How does someone who works as a cashier play piano like that? The room was buzzing with quiet energy. People were excited and curious and impressed all at the same time. They wanted to know more about Maria. They wanted to understand how they had been sitting next to such talent without knowing it. Some people were taking out their phones, not to text or check social media, but to record what might happen next. They sensed that this was a special moment, something they would want to remember and maybe share with others. Maria could feel the change in the room. The energy was completely different from when she had first sat down at the piano. Instead of impatience and dismissal, she felt attention and respect. Instead of people wanting to leave, she sensed that they wanted her to continue playing, but Maria also felt overwhelmed. She had not planned to reveal her musical abilities tonight. She had spent 20 years building a quiet, simple life where nobody expected anything special from her. Now all these people were looking at her with new eyes, and she was not sure she was ready for that kind of attention. Her hands were resting on the piano keys, and she could feel the warmth from the stage lights above her. Part of her wanted to stand up, say thank you, and return to her table where she could blend back into the crowd. That would be the safe thing to do. That would keep her life simple and uncomplicated, but another part of her, a part that had been sleeping for 20 years, was fully awake now. This part of her remembered what it felt like to share music with people. It remembered the joy of taking an audience on a musical journey. It remembered why she had fallen in love with piano in the first place. Maria looked out at all the faces watching her. She saw Emma's tear-stained cheeks and proud smile. She saw the principal waiting hopefully for more music. She saw strangers who had become genuinely interested in what she might play next. For the first time in 20 years, Maria felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She was not just a cashier or a single mother or someone filling in because the real pianist could not come. She was a musician, and she was surrounded by people who wanted to hear her music, without saying a word. Maria shifted her position slightly on the piano bench. She placed her hands back on the keys in a new position. The audience sensed that she was going to play something else, and the room became completely quiet again. This time, the quiet was not uncomfortable or restless. It was the respectful silence of people who knew they were about to hear something beautiful. Maria had made her decision. She was not going to play it safe. She was not going to return to her table and pretend this had never happened. She was going to continue being the musician she really was, at least for tonight. Maria looked down at her hands positioned on the piano keys. She had made her decision to continue, but what should she play next? The Chopin Nocturne had been beautiful and gentle, a perfect way to show her musical abilities without being too bold, but now that she had the attention and respect of everyone in the room, she felt brave enough to attempt something more challenging. She thought about Rachmaninoff's Prelude in Schur Minor. It was one of the most famous and difficult piano pieces ever written. It was also one of the most emotional and powerful. Maria had learned it when she was 17, and it had been her favorite piece to play when she wanted to express strong feelings. She had not attempted it in over 20 years. The piece was risky for several reasons. It required tremendous technical skill, with rapid passages and enormous stretching across the keys. It also demanded physical strength and endurance, as the music built to powerful, thundering climaxes. Most importantly, it was a piece that could not be played halfway. It demanded everything from the pianist, both technically and emotionally. Maria knew that attempting this piece was a gamble. If she failed, if her fingers were not strong enough, or if her memory failed her, she would embarrass herself in front of everyone. But something inside her was calling for this piece. After 20 years of hiding her talent, of being invisible, of playing it safe, she wanted to play something that would show everyone exactly what she was capable of. She placed her hands in the opening position and began the famous opening chords. The first notes of Rachmaninoff rang out in the gymnasium like thunder. Deep, powerful, and haunting, they filled the entire space and seemed to make the walls vibrate. Several people in the audience sat back in their chairs, surprised by the sudden intensity. The opening section of the prelude is like a conversation between despair and hope. Maria's left hand played the deep, rolling bass notes that sounded like church bells or the footsteps of giants. Her right hand answered with a melody that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Each note was perfectly controlled, with just the right amount of weight and expression. As Maria played, her body language changed completely. She was no longer the nervous woman who had been pushed onto the stage. She became a powerful musician who commanded the instrument and the room. Her arms moved with graceful strength as she reached across the keys. Her back was straight and confident. Her face showed intense concentration mixed with joy. The audience was completely captivated. Dr. Williams had attended many classical concerts in the city, but he had rarely heard Rachmaninoff played with such skill and passion. He leaned over to his wife and whispered, "She's extraordinary. This is concert-level playing." His wife could only nod. She was too amazed to speak. The music was so powerful that it made her feel things she had not felt in years. It reminded her of when she was young and everything seemed possible. It reminded her of dreams she had forgotten about. The teenagers in the room were experiencing classical music in a way they never had before. Usually, when their parents made them listen to classical music, it seemed boring and old-fashioned. But Maria's playing was making the music feel alive and exciting. One girl found herself moving slightly to the rhythm, something she had never done while listening to classical music. As Maria moved into the middle section of the piece, the music became even more complex. Her fingers flew across the keys and passages that would challenge even professional pianists. Her small hands had to stretch to reach all the necessary notes, but her technique was so solid that she made it look effortless. The sound of the piano filled every corner of the gymnasium. The acoustics were actually helping to make the music even more impressive. Every note was clear and resonant. The powerful passages seemed to surround the audience, while the gentle sections felt intimate and personal. Emma watched her mother with a mixture of amazement and pride that made her chest feel tight. She had always loved her mom, but now she was seeing her mom as other people would see her, as an incredibly talented artist. Emma started to understand that her mom had given up something very important to take care of their family. Mr. Lopez had stopped pretending to work and was standing completely still, his mop forgotten beside him. He had grown up in a family that loved music, and his grandmother had always listened to classical radio. He recognized the piece Maria was playing, and he knew how difficult it was. He could not believe that this quiet woman who said hello to him every morning when she dropped off Emma was playing one of the hardest pieces in the piano. Repertoire. Mrs. Garcia had called her co-workers from the kitchen, and they were all standing in the doorway, listening in amazement. None of them had ever heard live classical music before, and they were discovering how different it was from recordings. The music seemed to have a physical presence in the room, something you could feel as well as hear. As Maria built toward the climactic section of the prelude, her playing became more intense and powerful. The music demanded every bit of her strength and skill. Her arms moved with increasing force as she played the thunderous chords that make this piece famous. The sound was so loud and powerful that some people felt it in their chests, but even in the most dramatic moments, Maria's control was perfect. Every note was exactly where it should be. Every chord had the right balance of power and precision. She was not just hitting the keys hard. She was creating music that told a story of struggle and triumph. The principal had tears streaming down her face. She realized that she was witnessing something that would probably never happen again in her school. She was seeing a parent reveal a talent so extraordinary that it would change how everyone thought about her forever. People around the room were beginning to understand that they were not just hearing good amateur playing. They were hearing professional quality music from someone they had completely underestimated. Some of them were feeling embarrassed about their earlier comments and assumptions. Others were feeling excited about discovering such unexpected talent in their own community. As Maria approached the final section of the prelude, she knew she was succeeding. Her hands were strong, her memory was perfect, and her emotions were completely connected to the music. She was not just playing the notes. She was living the music, feeling every phrase and sharing those feelings with everyone in the room. The music was building to its powerful conclusion, and Maria could feel the energy and attention of everyone in the gymnasium focused completely on her and the piano. This was what she had missed for 20 years, the feeling of sharing something beautiful and meaningful with other people through music. She was no longer the cashier or the single mother or the woman in the cardigan. She was a pianist, and she was about to give these people a musical experience they would never forget. Maria brought the Rachmaninoff prelude to its thunderous conclusion. Her hands came down on the final chords with perfect timing and power. The last notes rang out in the gymnasium and then slowly faded into complete silence. For a moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the building's air conditioning system. Then, as if someone had given a signal, the entire room erupted in applause. But this was not the polite clapping that usually happened at school events. This was the kind of applause that people give when they have witnessed something truly extraordinary. People jumped to their feet so quickly that chairs scraped against the floor. The sound of clapping filled the gymnasium and seemed to go on forever. Maria sat at the piano bench, breathing heavily from the physical effort of playing such a demanding piece. She looked out at the standing crowd and felt overwhelmed by their response. She had forgotten what it felt like to receive applause for her music. The sound washed over her like a warm wave, and she felt tears starting to form in her eyes. Emma was clapping harder than anyone else, with tears of joy streaming down her face. She felt so proud of her mother that her heart seemed too big for her chest. She had always known her mom was special, but now she understood that her mom was truly gifted in a way that few people ever are. Dr. Williams was clapping enthusiastically while shaking his head in amazement. He turned to his wife and said loudly over the applause, "That was incredible. She plays better than most of the professionals I've heard at the symphony." The teenagers who had been so bored earlier were now cheering and whistling. They had never expected to enjoy classical music, but Maria's passionate performance had shown them that classical music could be exciting and powerful. One boy called out, "That was awesome." Mrs. Peterson, who had made the dismissive comments earlier, was applauding but also looked deeply embarrassed. She kept glancing around to see if anyone remembered her earlier words about letting just anyone participate. She realized how foolish she had sounded, and she hoped people would forget what she had said. The applause continued for several minutes. People did not want it to end because they did not want the magical moment to end. Some parents were recording the applause on their phones, wanting to capture this extraordinary evening. Finally, as the applause began to fade, people started calling out questions and comments. "Where did you learn to play like that?" someone shouted. "Are you a professional musician?" another person asked. "Why haven't we heard you play before?" Maria stood up from the piano bench, still feeling shaky from the intensity of her performance and the overwhelming response. She was not sure how to answer these questions. For 20 years, she had avoided talking about her musical background because it brought up too many painful memories. The principal stepped forward with the microphone. "Maria, that was absolutely beautiful. Would you be willing to tell us a little about your musical background?" Maria took the microphone with hands that were still trembling slightly. She looked out at all the faces watching her expectantly. These people had just heard her pour her heart out through music, and now they wanted to know her story. I studied piano when I was younger," she said quietly into the microphone. Her voice was barely loud enough for people to hear. "I haven't played for other people in a very long time." "But where did you study?" Dr. Williams called out. "That level of playing doesn't come from just taking lessons." Maria felt her heart beating faster. She had never told anyone in this town about her past. She had kept that part of her life completely private. But now, standing in front of all these people who had just heard her music, it felt wrong to keep hiding the truth. "I was accepted to Juilliard," she said, her voice getting a little stronger. "I had a full scholarship to study piano performance." The gymnasium became completely quiet again. Juilliard was a name that everyone recognized, even people who did not know much about music. It was one of the most famous and prestigious music schools in the world. Only the most talented young musicians ever got accepted there. But I never went, Maria continued. My mother became very sick right after I graduated from high school. She needed someone to take care of her, and I was all she had. So I stayed home instead of going to school. The silence in the room was profound. People were beginning to understand the sacrifice that Maria had made. She had given up one of the most prestigious opportunities in the music world to take care of her family. Emma felt her heart breaking a little bit as she learned this part of her mother's story for the first time. Her mom had given up her dreams to be a good daughter, and later to be a good mother. Emma started to understand why her mom always seemed a little sad sometimes, especially when she looked at the old piano in their apartment. How long did you take care of your mother? The principal asked gently. 7 years, Maria replied. She passed away when Emma was 2 years old. By then, I felt like it was too late to go back to music. I had been away from it for so long, and I had a little daughter to support. Mrs. Henderson felt tears in her eyes as she listened to Maria's story. She thought about her own life and realized how easy things had been for her compared to what Maria had experienced. She had been able to follow her dreams and have her career, while Maria had sacrificed everything for her family. So you've been working regular jobs all these years? Someone asked. Yes, Maria said. I've cleaned houses, worked in restaurants, and now I work at the grocery store. Emma and I have a good life. We're happy. Mr. Lopez felt a deep respect for Maria as he listened to her story. He knew what it was like to work hard jobs to support a family. But he had never known that someone with such extraordinary talent was working alongside regular people like him. It made him think differently about the customers he saw every day. Maybe some of them had amazing hidden talents too. But you kept playing piano at home? A parent asked. Maria hesitated before answering. Not really. I tried to play sometimes, but it made me too sad. It reminded me of everything I had given up. So mostly the piano just sat there. The room was completely silent as people absorbed this information. They were realizing that they had been in the presence of extraordinary talent for years without knowing it. Maria had been checking out their groceries, and they had never imagined that she was someone who could have been a professional concert pianist. Dr. Williams stood up. Maria, I owe you an apology. We all do. We made assumptions about you without knowing anything about who you really are. Several other people nodded in agreement. They were feeling embarrassed about their earlier attitudes, but they were also feeling excited about having discovered such incredible talent in their own community. You don't owe me any apology, Maria said into the microphone. I chose to keep my music private. I chose to live a quiet life. But tonight I remembered why I fell in love with music in the first place. I remembered what it feels like to share something beautiful with other people. The principal took the microphone back. Maria, would you consider playing one more piece for us? After hearing your story, I think we would all be honored to hear more of your music. Maria looked out at the audience. These people had gone from dismissing her to giving her a standing ovation to learning her life story. She felt more connected to her community than she had ever felt before. And she realized that she was not ready for this magical evening to end. I would be happy to play one more piece, she said with a smile that was brighter than any smile she had worn in years. For her final piece, Maria chose Debussy's Clair de Lune. After the power and drama of the Rachmaninoff, she wanted to end the evening with something gentle and dreamy. As the beautiful flowing melody filled the gymnasium, people felt like they were being transported to another world. The music was like moonlight made into sound, soft and silvery and magical. When the last notes faded away, the applause was even longer and more enthusiastic than before. People did not want to let Maria leave the stage. They kept clapping and calling out their appreciation. Some people were wiping tears from their eyes. Others were shaking their heads in amazement at what they had just experienced. Finally, Maria returned to her table where Emma was waiting to hug her tightly. Mom, you were incredible, Emma whispered. I'm so proud of you." As people began to leave the gymnasium, many of them stopped by Maria's table to talk to her. They wanted to thank her for the beautiful music and to tell her how much her performance had meant to them. Mrs. Henderson was one of the first to approach. "Maria, I can't believe I've known you for 3 years and never knew about your talent. That was the most beautiful music I've ever heard live." Dr. Williams came over with his wife. "Maria, I have season tickets to the symphony, and I can honestly say that your playing tonight was as good as anything I've heard from professional musicians. Have you ever thought about returning to music professionally?" Maria was touched by all the kind words, but she was also feeling overwhelmed. She had lived quietly for so long that all this attention felt strange and intense. "Thank you, but I'm not sure I'm ready for anything like that. This was just one evening." But as the days following the fundraising event passed, Maria discovered that her life was changing whether she was ready or not. Word about her incredible performance spread quickly through the small town. People who had not been at the event heard about it from friends and neighbors. Soon, everyone seemed to know about the grocery store cashier who was actually an amazing pianist. The local newspaper, the Lincoln Herald, called Maria and asked if they could interview her and write a story about her performance. Maria was hesitant at first, but the reporter was very kind and respectful. The article that appeared on the front page of the next week's edition was titled, "Hidden Virtuoso Among Us, Local Mother's Musical Gift Amazes Community." The article told Maria's story with sensitivity and respect. It explained about her acceptance to Juilliard, her sacrifice to care for her mother, and her years of working regular jobs while her musical talent remained hidden. The story touched many people in the community who had made their own sacrifices for family or who had put their dreams on hold for practical reasons, but the newspaper story was just the beginning. Someone at the fundraising event had recorded part of Maria's performance on their phone and posted it on social media. The video began to spread beyond just their small town. Within a week, thousands of people had watched the recording and shared it with their friends. The video reached Sarah Chun, who was the director of the Regional Arts Center in the nearby city. Sarah had studied at Juilliard herself and immediately recognized the exceptional quality of Maria's playing. She called Maria and invited her to perform at the Arts Center's monthly recital series. "I understand this might seem overwhelming," Sarah said during their phone conversation, "but talent like yours deserves to be shared with more people. Would you consider giving a recital here? We could start small, maybe a Sunday afternoon performance." Maria was nervous about the idea, but she was also excited. Emma encouraged her to say yes. "Mom, you made everyone so happy with your music. Think about how many more people you could make happy." Meanwhile, word about Maria's talent was spreading through the school community in other ways. Parents began approaching her to ask if she would consider teaching their children piano. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose daughter was in Emma's class, was the first to ask. "My daughter has been taking piano lessons for 2 years, but she's not making much progress with her current teacher," Mrs. Rodriguez explained. "After hearing you play, I know you could really help her understand music in a deeper way. Would you consider teaching her?" Maria had never thought about teaching piano, but the idea appealed to her. She had always loved working with children, and the thought of sharing her love of music with young people seemed natural and right. Soon, other parents were asking the same question. Dr. Williams wanted his son to study with Maria. Mrs. Peterson, despite her earlier dismissive comments, asked if Maria would consider teaching her daughter. Even some of the teenagers who had been at the fundraising event asked their parents to inquire about lessons. The school principal, Mrs. Davidson, had her own idea about how Maria could contribute to the community. She visited Maria at work one day to propose something special. "Maria, our school's music program has been struggling for years," Mrs. Davidson explained. "We don't have a dedicated music teacher, and we can't afford to hire one full-time. But what if we created a part-time position for you? You could work with our students, maybe start a choir or organize some musical performances. It would be perfect for someone with your talent and experience." Maria was intrigued by the idea. She had always loved the school environment, and working with children in a musical setting sounded wonderful. "I would need to keep my job at the grocery store," she said. "Emma and I still need the steady income." "Of course," Mrs. Davidson replied. "We could work around your schedule. Maybe you could come in for a few hours in the afternoons or on weekends." As these opportunities began to present themselves, Maria felt a mixture of excitement and fear. For 20 years, she had lived a simple, predictable life. She knew exactly what each day would bring, and there were no surprises or risks. Now, suddenly, people were offering her chances to return to the world of music. Emma could see that her mother was struggling with these decisions. One evening, as they sat together in their small living room with the old piano in the corner, Emma brought up the subject. "Mom, are you scared about all these music opportunities?" Emma asked. Maria thought for a moment before answering. "Yes, I am scared. I've been away from music for so long. What if I'm not as good as people think I am? What if I disappoint them?" But Mom," Emma said, "you were amazing at the school event. Everyone could see how talented you are. And you seemed so happy when you were playing." "I haven't seen you that happy in a long time." Emma was right. During those minutes on stage playing for the audience, Maria had felt more like herself than she had in years. She had felt alive and purposeful in a way that was completely different from her everyday life. "Maybe it's time to stop being scared," Emma continued. "Maybe it's time to let people hear your music." That night, Maria sat at her old piano and played quietly for the first time in months. As her fingers moved across the familiar keys, she thought about all the possibilities that were opening up in her life. She thought about the children she could teach, the audiences she could perform for, and the joy she could share through music. For the first time in 20 years, Maria began to believe that it might not be too late to reclaim the dreams she had set aside. Maybe her sacrifice had not been the end of her musical life. Maybe it had just been a long intermission, and now the second act was about to begin. 6 months after the school fundraising event that changed everything, Maria's life looked completely different, yet she remained the same caring person she had always been. She still worked at the grocery store 3 days a week, but now her schedule included something she had never imagined possible. Again, music was back at the center of her life. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, Maria's small apartment filled with the sounds of young pianists learning their craft. She had started with just 3 students, but word about her exceptional teaching ability spread quickly. Now she had 12 regular students ranging in age from 6 to 16, and there was a waiting list of families hoping for openings. Maria discovered that teaching piano brought her a different kind of joy than performing. When 8-year-old Sophie finally mastered a difficult passage she had been struggling with for weeks, Maria felt as proud as if she had performed a perfect concert herself. When teenage Michael played his first complete sonata without mistakes, Maria's eyes filled with tears of happiness. "Mrs. Santos makes music make sense," Sophie told her mother after one lesson. "She doesn't just tell us which keys to press. She helps us understand what the music is trying to say." The lessons took place around the old piano that had sat silent for so many years. Maria had used some of her new income to have it professionally tuned and repaired. The piano seemed grateful to be making music again, producing warm, rich tones that filled the small space with beauty. Maria's teaching style was patient and encouraging, probably because she understood what it felt like to have dreams interrupted. She never made her students feel bad when they made mistakes. Instead, she helped them understand that mistakes were just part of learning, and that the most important thing was to keep trying and to love the music. Emma often sat in the corner during lessons, doing her homework while listening to her mother teach. She loved hearing her mom explain music to other children. Maria would say things like, "Imagine the melody is a bird flying through the trees," or "Play this section like you're walking through fresh snow." Emma was learning about music too, just by listening. The position at Lincoln Elementary School had worked out even better than anyone had expected. Maria spent Monday and Wednesday afternoons at the school, working with groups of children who were interested in music. She had started a small choir that performed at school assemblies, and she was helping individual students who showed musical promise. Mrs. Davidson, the principal, was amazed by the changes Maria had brought to the school. "The children are so much more excited about music now," she told Maria one afternoon. "You've awakened something in them that I didn't even know was there." Maria had also accepted Sarah Chun's invitation to perform at the Regional Arts Center. Her first recital was on a Sunday afternoon in March, and she had been terrified that no one would come. But the small concert hall was completely full. With people from her town making the 30-minute drive to hear her play, the recital was a huge success. Maria played some of the same pieces she had performed at the school event, along with several new ones she had been working on. The audience was captivated from the first note to the last. After the concert, several people approached her about performing at other venues. "I haven't felt this moved by a piano recital in years," said Professor Martinez, who taught at the nearby university. "You play with such honesty and emotion. Music needs more performers like you." But perhaps the most meaningful change in Maria's life was the transformation in her relationship with Emma. Now that music was back in their home, they had something new to share together. Maria had started teaching Emma to play piano, and Emma was proving to be a quick learner with a good ear for music. "I think I understand now why music was so important to you," Emma told her mother one evening after her lesson. "When I play, it feels like I'm speaking a special language that comes from inside my heart." Maria smiled as she listened to her daughter. Emma was discovering the same magic that Maria had fallen in love with as a child. At this time, Maria was not going to have to choose between music and family. This time she could have both. The extra income from teaching and performing had also improved their financial situation. Maria was able to buy Emma some new clothes and school supplies without worrying about the cost. They had even started saving money for Emma to attend summer music camp the following year, on quiet evenings when there were no lessons scheduled. Maria and Emma would often sit together at the piano. Sometimes Maria would play while Emma listened. Sometimes Emma would practice while Maria offered gentle guidance. And sometimes they would play simple duets together, their four hands creating harmonies that filled their small apartment with joy. The people in their community had embraced Maria's musical identity in ways that surprised and touched her. The grocery store where she worked had put up a small sign that read, "Proud to employ local pianist Maria Santos." Customers who recognized her from the newspaper article or the viral video often stopped to chat about music while she rang up their groceries. "It's so cool that we have a real pianist working here," a teenage customer told her one day. "My mom showed me that video of you playing. You're like famous," Maria laughed. She did not feel famous. She felt like herself, but a more complete version of herself than she had been in 20 years. Dr. Williams had become one of Maria's biggest supporters in the community. He and his wife had attended every one of her performances, and their son was one of her piano students. "You've enriched our entire community," he told Maria after her latest recital. "You've shown us that extraordinary talent can be found in the most unexpected places." As Maria looked back on the 6 months since that night at the school fundraising event, she marveled at how much her life had changed. But the most important change was not the teaching or the performing or the recognition. The most important change was that she had stopped hiding who she really was. For 20 years, Maria had thought that her dreams were over, that she had missed her chance to be a musician. She had believed that sacrificing her music for her family meant giving it up forever. But now she understood that her sacrifice had not ended her musical life, it had just delayed it, and made it different. She was not the young concert pianist she might have become if she had gone to Juilliard. Instead, she was something perhaps even more valuable, a teacher, a performer, and a community member who used her gift to bring joy and beauty into other people's lives. On Sunday evenings, after all the lessons were finished and all the performances were complete, Maria would sit at her piano and play quietly for herself. Sometimes she played the classical pieces that had made her famous in their small town. Sometimes she played simple melodies that reminded her of her childhood, but most often she played new music, pieces she was learning for future performances, songs she was arranging for her students, or melodies that came to her spontaneously. This music represented something wonderful, not just the return of old dreams, but the beginning of new ones. Maria Santos had learned that it is never too late to reclaim the parts of yourself that you thought were lost forever. She had learned that sometimes the detours in life lead to destinations that are even more beautiful than the ones you originally planned to reach. And most importantly, she had learned that sharing your gifts with others multiplies their power in ways you never could have imagined. As she played in the gentle light of her living room, with Emma reading nearby and the sounds of their neighborhood settling into evening quiet around them, Maria felt complete. She was a mother, a teacher, a performer, and a member of a community that valued and celebrated her gifts. She was exactly who she was meant to be, and her music was exactly where it belonged, not hidden away, but shared freely with a world that needed its beauty.